There seems to be more and more crackdowns on the Latin Mass, Latin sacraments.
Tom, it's more honest for them to act this way because the New Order liturgy was never meant to coexist with the traditional Mass anyway. You know, we're not just talking about the Latin Mass. We're talking about the traditional Roman Rite of Mass that Francis wants to annihilate. When the new rite came out, though, under Paul VI, the original plan was that the traditional Roman Rite would simply disappear from the face of the earth. And for 20 years, the first 20 years after the new rite came out, this was exactly what was imposed. I mean, no matter where we went, as newly ordained priests, we were told you cannot be saying this traditional Roman rite is absolutely forbidden. Every now and then we'd hear about some old retired priest who was put away in a nursing home somewhere who was allowed to still carry on saying the old Latin rite, which he knew, but he couldn't do it publicly. You certainly couldn't expose the children to that. Why? Because they had to be absolutely cut off from any knowledge even that there was such a thing. They had to be raised entirely in the Novus Ordo. Very much like the communists said that, give me one generation, let me cut them off from their roots, and I will give you a bunch of communists. So the Novus Ordo had that intention, to completely obliterate the traditional Mass. The only reason why they relented under John Paul II was because Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated bishops. And they didn't succeed in snuffing out the Society of St. Pius X. They had tried for the previous decade, basically, to get Archbishop Lefebvre to agree to a protocol whereby they would take control over the SSPX and finally actually control what bishop they would have to succeed Archbishop Lefebvre, or absolutely just deny them a bishop to succeed him. They failed at that. And so then notice immediately after failing that, and immediately after Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated bishops, they instantaneously had a change of heart and they began to allow the traditional Latin Mass within the diocese. The dioceses under very controlled circumstances. This was simply a ploy. They felt that they had to. It was a tactic to prevent people from leaving. You know, they were basically hemorrhaging their life's blood. People were leaving them. But now, with Francis now, they're trying to take us back to that time and pick up where they left off. With the idea, now we're going to really carry out Vatican II, and we're going to utterly annihilate the traditional Mass. We're going to cut off an entire generation from even a knowledge of the traditional Mass. And this is the way they expect that they're going to complete the revolution of Vatican II.
Mm-hmm. And Father, if someone is in the Novus Ordo, though, and they see this happening, they see that their Pope is taking away their Mass and their sacraments. They see that their Pope, their Supreme Pontiff, has no regard whatsoever for the saint martyrs that we have in North America, and
he apologizes for them.
Yeah. And you see all these things, even if you are unsure of the papal question and haven't quite worked through all of that. If you have any semblance of Catholicism, you know that you cannot partake in these things. You know you cannot participate in these. You cannot be in any way be affiliated with someone who worships idols and practices pagan ceremonies, pagan rituals. Even if you haven't worked through the papal question, don't you have to just leave this church, whatever you want to call it?
If you're going to be an honest Catholic, yes, you can. Yeah, you have to. You can't be. You see, the problem is there's somebody who feels stuck, that they feel a moral obligation almost to somehow spin this and justify it somehow, and because they're caught in the middle. They're caught in the modernist trap. Okay, it's exactly the trap that Cardinal Ottaviani spoke about in 1969 when the new Mass came out. That there's a tragic alternative, quote unquote, he said, between accepting this Novus Ordo liturgy, which is so obviously not Catholic. It does not, he said, stand for the faith as taught by the Council of Trent, and has no intention of standing for that faith. And yet he says the Catholic conscience is bound to that faith forever. So he says, well, what is a Catholic to do then? He said this will put even the best of the Catholics, the most faithful of Catholics, he says, will be facing a tragic alternative between obeying what they're told, thinking they're obeying by accepting the new order, the New Order liturgy, which does not stand for their faith and has no intention of doing so, which is contrary to their faith, or if rejecting it and appearing to be disobedient, right? To appearing to be somehow rebels and so on, be branded as schismatics and all the rest, simply because they're holding on to the old traditional faith of the Council of Trent and the traditional worship of the church. This is the tragic alternative, and it continues today. The people today are desperately trying to somehow salvage Francis and his papacy and to still remain Catholic, and they find it more and more difficult to do so. In fact, what they have to do, they have to perform such not only intellectual gymnastics, but they have to perform such atrocities to their faith. They become almost contortionists when it comes to their faith, that eventually they find themselves compromising in matters of faith. And their faith is beginning to erode. They begin to actually believe, maybe it's not that bad. Actually, maybe there is a point here for Francis actually taking part in Pachamama worship in the Vatican. Maybe that's really not a bad thing. Maybe, they start thinking, well, maybe it's a good thing, or at least if it's not a good thing, maybe it's just not that bad anymore. Well, when they say that, they've been scandalized. They've actually drank the Kool-Aid. They are scandalized by Francis' behavior, and their faith is beginning to crumble away.
Familiarity breeds acceptance. They see it.
Yes, and
enough.
they have to continually find a way to justify this, or at least, if not justify, to say that it's not absolutely incompatible with being a Catholic and even being a pope. And as soon as they start thinking like that, they're already beginning to lose their grip on the faith. This is what's going on right now. The modernists have figured it out very well.
Well, Father,
although not as well as they think. The greatest atrocities in history have been committed by those who thought they were very, very smart, but they weren't quite as smart as they thought they were.